Well, it's good to have everyone here this morning. And as always, we have a few of our regular members who are gone, and we have some who are visiting. But this morning we have a lot of visitors that are normally not here and may never be here again, actually. And Susan and I have been a part of a 50th class reunion of the 1969 class here in Cordell. And we were together some Friday night and some Saturday morning and some last night. And some of them said they were going to come this morning, and it looks to me like a bunch of them came this morning. It's been really, really interesting. In addition, Mrs. Emerson, or Pat Emerson, is here. What we can't figure out, she's one of our favorite teachers, what we can't figure out is why she looks younger than most of us. You know, and outside of our class is Keith Gerlach, and we ought to commend Keith Gerlach for being here this morning. He's been taking care of a 2.5-year-old granddaughter all by himself since Friday. And so, Keith, we're pretty impressed that you're here this morning. So, you know, we had an interesting time seeing everyone, and but what I found most interesting was to listen to the stories that people told about their lives. And, of course, we didn't hear all the stories, and I didn't pick up all the stories, but I really found it interesting because every life is important, every story is interesting, and at times those stories are literally fascinating, and every single person has a story. And I found that tremendously interesting. And so normally on a Sunday morning, right now at least, for the last few months, I've been looking at lessons from the book of James. And we're still not finished with all that, though I thought we'd be finished in August. We're still looking at the book of James. But I'm not going to do that this morning. I want to take off on this idea of story. And what I thought I would do is tell you a bit of my story. At least a little piece of a story that you might find helpful and beneficial, and I hope it's beneficial to everyone in the audience and everyone who's encouraged thereby. Since my 20s, what makes this embarrassing this morning for me is that a lot of these people I haven't seen for 50 years. I've seen Dennis since 50 years, but a lot of people I haven't seen for 50 years. They know me as I was back then. And thankfully, we get to change along the way. And in my mid-20s, I started collecting principles. I started collecting principles that I thought I could use to figure out how to live life better. And I have 50 or 60 or 70 of those principles printed, written. And yet I want to pick up on recent ones. One, for example, that caught my attention in 2013. I became familiar with the work of Dr. David Cooperrider from Case Western Reserve University. He developed something called appreciative inquiry. It was a method of institutional or organizational or personal change. And I was really attracted to it because there were only 5 principles to all of his massive amount of work. 3 of those 5 principles I already had in my bunch. But a couple I didn't have, and one in particular caught my attention, and I thought maybe I need to pay attention to this principle. It's so simple. It's so obvious. My paraphrase of it is, whatever you focus on grows. Whatever you focus on gets larger and larger and larger. And I thought how often it is that we look at someone and we look at a flaw, an imperfection. We all have them, by the way. Not a single one of us is free of those kind of things. And we start focusing on it. And if I start focusing on that flaw or that imperfection in the life of another person, the more I focus on it, the larger it gets. And sometimes it gets so large that all I can see is the problem. Well, I don't have time this morning to go through it all, but it took me down a journey. And I began to realize what happens to Ken's life if he starts focusing on things that are really good. And could they grow? And then I began to realize, well, I already knew that. Because in Philippians chapter 4, when Paul is talking about a joy-filled life, he said, why don't you think about things that are pure, remember that? And think about things that are lovely, and think about things that are good, and think about things that are excellent. Why don't you focus on that so that can grow? I was interested in that principle. And it took me a little ways, but it didn't take me where I really wanted to go. It didn't take me as far as I thought I needed to go. So a little bit later, I found another principle. I was reading a book called Daring Greatly. It's from a woman who's a researcher at the University of Houston, and Brene Brown has now become world famous. But in her book, Daring Greatly, Brene Brown said, the problem in our world, in part, is narcissism. I thought, yeah, I've been talking about that for a long, long time. It's selfishness. We are so self-centered. We've been studying in James. He said the wisdom of this world is embedded in selfishness. And people are always saying, well, what about me? What's in this for me? But she shocked me when she said, but that's really not the major problem of our culture here in America. She said, the problem of our culture here in America is the principle of scarcity. And I thought, this lady's crazy. Because there's nothing scarce about anything in America. But then she defined the principle of scarcity, and she said, principle of scarcity is when we live our lives as Americans and we think we never have enough. And the mantra becomes, it's never enough. And so we're racing through life, and we think if we have a little more and a little more and a little more, life will get so much better for us. So we open our closets and we look inside of our closets and say it's not enough. And we look in our garage and look at the car and say it's not enough. And we look at our last pay raise and say, well, it's not enough. And it even gets to the point we look at our spouse and now we finally say she's not enough or he's not enough. Sometimes parents even look at children and say they're not enough. And I thought, oh my lands. That's kind of describing me. Because I've been on this treadmill where I've been running faster and faster and thinking I've got to grab a little more and a little more and a little more. And suddenly Brene Brown said, here's the antidote to that problem. She said, you've got to learn to say, it is enough. You've got to learn to stop in life and say, what I have, where God has me at the moment, it is enough. Doesn't mean you can't better yourself. But the power of the phrase, it is enough, made major impact on me. Because it's dealing with the subject of contentment. I have a lot of good friends in this group, lifelong friends. Laverne Berry or Strawberry and Randy Holman and I started school at Dill City together and ended up graduating here together. Randy's been telling me for several years now, Ken, you've got to slow down. You've got to stop. He calls me one day, I'm at a car dealership getting the oil changed. He said, you looked stressed last time I saw you. I said, I was stressed last time I saw you. It is enough. And it's exactly what Paul taught in the same letter of the book of Philippians, chapter 4, when he's talking about living a joy-filled life. He said, you know what? I had to learn. I had to learn. That's the word, learn. How to be content. Whether I had a lot or whether I didn't have very much, I had to learn how to say, it is enough. And I thought, wow, I really need to think about that one. And I've used it. I've used it a lot in the last few years. It seemed Bible-based to me. I used it a lot. But all that didn't get me where I wanted to go. And I can't say that I'm where I need to be altogether right now, but I found a principle a couple of years ago. It was right here. It was right here I found a principle. It has had profound impact on my life. I wish it could have impact on all your lives this morning. We have been studying through Mark's Gospel. I always do through a series. I don't like topical lessons, though I'm doing one, okay? I really don't like them. But I only talk, man, I'm going to get close. I usually end at 11:15. I promised this group I'd be done at 11:15. I got to hurry. My most important, but I got to hurry. But it took me almost a year to get through Mark's Gospel. So it was August or something like that, and I said, okay, I'm going to just do some topical lessons. I'm going to look at the fruits of the Spirit. We did a sermon on self-control and kindness and goodness and love. And then I got to hope. Did one on that. Then I got to joy. And I got to peace, the inner peace. Living free of anxiety. Living free of stress. And joy. Living a joy-filled life. And I thought, I don't know what to say. And I've got those verses. I've got those biblical verses that say, don't be anxious for anything. And I've got the words of Jesus where Jesus says, why are you worrying about clothing? Or why are you worrying about food? Why are you worrying about these things? Worrying doesn't do any good at all. And I have this verse where Paul says, be joyful always. And I thought, how in the world do you do that? Because I've been hearing that all my life. And I worry just as much as everybody else. And I wrestle with this joy thing just as much as everybody else. How do I do this? And then we came to Proverbs chapter 3 and verse 5 and found the principle. Trust, I've heard this too, okay? Trust in the Lord with all your heart. And don't lean on your own understanding. And I never paid attention to the last part. Lean on your own understanding? That's what I've been doing. Do you know that most people in this audience are trained? I don't see Larry Bonham, but he became a medical doctor. He's retired now. But as a medical doctor, what were you trained? To solve problems. I walk in and say, Larry, my throat, it doesn't feel good. He solves my problem. Lean on your own understanding. Have you ever been like me and you try to go to sleep at night and your mind is still rolling and rolling and rolling and you can't get through the problem? Or you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, the problem jumps back in. I keep trying to solve it. Only to find out that there are some problems that I can't solve. In fact, I have found out there are a lot of things in my life that I can't solve. And the answer is trust in the Lord. But then I began to ask this question. I've been hearing that all my life too, and I've never, ever, ever been taught. I've been going to church all my life. Never been taught that I remember how to trust. So we spent 3 months looking at examples of people who really trusted so that I might acquire that as a habit. It's been so interesting. How many times in the last bit of time I have run into something for which I have no answer. It may be in the life of one of our children. It may be in our own life. And I'm finding myself saying, God, I don't have any clue how to do this. I don't know what the next step is. I don't know how to direct my own steps. If you don't act, if you don't step in and do something, nothing's going to work. This is all going to cave in. It was as late as this last Wednesday. Susan and I had to make a flying trip back to Lubbock because the doctor had called and said, Susan, you need to come back. And after 20 years of thinking this problem was solved, for a doctor to say you've got to come back and do this test, it was somewhat alarming. And yet I went back to this principle, we have no control. Susan and I had no control. But I started thinking about this thing that I've been saying, I got to trust. Every single day I got to trust. You know what happened? We got there. She went in to see the doctor or do these tests, and the radiologist came in and said, I got good news and bad news. The good news, I've reviewed all these tests for the last 8 years. We just got a new machine that's much more detailed. Everything is fine. That's the good news. There's no problem here. Bad news, you drove all the way from Oklahoma to find out. But the thing that was underlying all that was trust. Here's what I wish. I wish that and I wish that we all could learn to live this life knowing that there is a Father in heaven who loves us more than we can possibly describe. He loves us so much that He did send, as was said earlier, His Son. It's by His grace that Jesus came. And by Jesus Christ, we have a relationship with the Father who loves us, and we can put our trust in Him. And all these issues of life where I don't know what to do, the first place to turn is not to my great ability to solve problems, because I have found out my ability to solve all these problems, though I thought I was trained well in solving problems, I'm just running into more and more and more over which I have no control. I'm having to turn and say, my Father in heaven, through the name of your Son, would you please deal with this, because I can't. May I tell you, it's a pretty good way to live your life. May I tell you, it changes your perspective on life. Oh, I still think what I focus on grows, and I'm careful. I still believe in saying, it is enough. It is enough. Get off the treadmill. It is enough. But I believe with all my heart that trust in the Lord is the key. Learning how to do that every single day. I wish it for you. Let's stand and sing our song.